So this is my lecture on Jesus' teachings, particularly with an emphasis on the parables. So the first thing I want to begin with is what I believe to be an awareness on Jesus' part regarding his place in the history and liturgy of Israel. And so his teachings are going to reflect that awareness, which is to say, in many ways it is the foundation of Jesus' teachings. He is aware that he is the greater son of David. He is aware in some way that he is the new Moses. He is aware that he is the fulfillment of God's promise given to Abraham, that through Abraham's seed, God's blessing would come to the world. And so Jesus is presenting his teachings within the larger context of Israel's history and liturgy, Israel's self-awareness, the kind of cultural framework that they live in. So this is part and parcel with what you've been learning about the historical dimension of the text, or what Fee refers to as the exegetical task. You want to be aware of these things that are operating in the background. So that's kind of critical. The other thing is the kingdom of God is always present in Jesus' ministry and teachings. It's kind of like what you read in Fee about reading the Gospels. One of the things you need to be aware of when you read the Gospels is that it's really all about the kingdom. The kingdom that God is bringing through the life, ministry, teachings, crucifixion, death, resurrection, ascension of Jesus Christ. The kingdom is the reality that Jesus is bringing. And so with that in mind, as a kind of foundation or background, I'm going to draw upon the works of a gentleman named Robert Stein, who wrote a book called The Method and Message of Jesus' Teachings. And he identifies 4 basic elements to help us understand and characterize Jesus' teachings. The first is the content. There's going to be some overlap, by the way, with what I'm going to say now, what I just said to you. First, the content of Jesus' teachings is primarily the idea that God is again present among his people. That once again, the ruling reign, the kingdom of God, is truly being made present among his people in a way that hasn't been seen perhaps since the time of Moses, maybe during the time of David, but I would argue even greater than those 2 forefathers in Israel. The kingdom of God is becoming present in a new way through the life and teachings of Jesus' ministry. And the other thing I want to say is that Jesus' teachings is not just a conceptual reality. It's not just ideas that are being conveyed through the medium of words. There is that conceptuality to Jesus' teachings, but there's also an existential dimension. A sense that through Jesus' teachings, the reality that he is describing to us, the reality that he is trying to make us aware of, this kingdom that we've been talking about, through Jesus' teachings, his kingdom is becoming present and meeting people where they are. And that leads to the second point that Robert Stein points to, which is Jesus' personality. He was a unique person. I would argue as a theologian, on the basis of reading the Bible as well as other theologians, that Jesus was arguably the first truly human being, the first genuinely human person, the person who revealed humanity in a way that God designed humanity to be. That's what we see in Jesus. So that's interesting because Jesus not only reveals God, because he's the Son of God, but Jesus reveals humanity, true humanity. And so I believe that's what people are experiencing in his ministry and in his teachings. Jesus loved, the people loved listening to Jesus because of the kind of person he was. He embodied the ethic of the kingdom that he was preaching and teaching about. And people knew that there was no hypocrisy in him, that he was a genuine person. And so when Jesus talked about love, they knew that he was a lover. When Jesus talked about the least becoming the greatest, they knew that he was one who made himself least, that he was one who was genuinely humble in heart, who sought to serve others. So when Jesus talked about service, they saw in Jesus' life one who served. And yet they knew he was great in ways that were perhaps indescribable, but they encountered a kind of greatness in him, but it was a greatness that was put to use to serve others. It was a greatness that was seen in the magnitude of how the other thing that Stein talks about is authority. So far we've talked about the content of Jesus' teaching, the kingdom, his personality, that he embodied the ethic of the kingdom, that he was a teacher of love, but a unique kind of love, holy redeeming love, and now Jesus' authority. So Jesus did not teach with derivative authority, as perhaps the other teachers of Israel did, where they relied upon quoting those who went before them who were recognized authority to kind of buttress up their own teaching. Instead, Jesus taught as one who had his own authority. You can particularly see this in the book of Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus would say, "You have heard it was said, but I tell you." And then Matthew is very intentional in recording the response of the crowd to Jesus' teaching when the Sermon on the Mount is wrapped up. The crowd said, "He does not teach like the others. He teaches as one who has his own authority." Now, I've already talked about authority in an earlier video, where I said that there's this connection between Jesus' teachings and his wonder works, his ministry of miracles, insofar as when Jesus exercised authority over nature, and we see that when he walks on the water, we see that when he calls forth Lazarus from the dead, we see that when he's multiplying the loaves and the fishes, and he's restoring sight to the blind, and he's allowing the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak, and he's delivering those who are bound up in oppression to various dark forces. He's delivering them from those forces into a new freedom. That is Jesus' authority at work over creation. And so it's that same authority that's able to change creation and restore creation that is at work in his ministry when he's teaching. And so what that means, and I think I've already said this on some level, is that when he is teaching about the kingdom, he's actually, through that teaching, making the kingdom present and available to those who hear. So what they're experiencing in Jesus is the authority of God. But what's really interesting is that Jesus made it very clear that he came to do the Father's work. That what he was doing, he was only doing what he sees the Father doing. What he was speaking were the words that the Father had given to him. So he was one who was in submission. He was obedient to the Father's will, and it was through that submission and obedience that people were experiencing. Finally, let's talk about the forms and techniques. He was an exciting teacher, and he taught in ways that were quite memorable because he was a master of literary forms, of teaching forms. So again, he was talking about deep and profound realities, moral truths, spiritual truths, all of which under the umbrella of the kingdom that was breaking in through his ministry. But he was taking these deep realities about the nature of God's kingdom and what God was doing to restore creation and bringing Israel, the history of Israel and the liturgy of Israel to its proper end. He was taking these deep teachings and he was making it accessible to people through his use of analogies, through illustrations, through stories and parables and vivid imagery. He was using exaggeration and irony and hyperbole, deep truths that are often perhaps beyond the threshold of our ordinary consciousness. And he's bringing it into the threshold of our consciousness through these teachings forms, through these literary forms. And now we are able to envision them in our imaginations, and they take root in our hearts, and they become a lived reality for us. A reality that we believe is now in reach through Jesus' teachings. All right, that's it for now. Goodbye.